Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome back. This is a podcast where we discuss some of the unique challenges of tech spend in the public sector. My name is Mallory Boudreau, and I lead Aptio, an IBM company's account management function for EMEA. And I'm joined by two wonderful guests, Richard and Greg. Richard, could you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Mallory. My name is Richard Warwick. I'm an associate partner in IBM's Institute for Business Value. Over the course of about 30 years in consulting, I've worked with a variety of federal civilian agencies, a variety of federal defense agencies, including special forces. I've done since then a lot of work in the private sector around the globe. Very happy to be here to talk about changes in the public sector and how to get the most out of the investments that we're making in IT.
What about you, Greg?
Thanks, Valerie. Thanks, Richard. Greg Holmes. I'm UK based. I've worked across the UK and Europe for many years in the technology field. I'm actually the field CTO for Aptio across EMEA, so supporting all of the technology solutions based from Aptio. And for today, I'm really excited to talk about some of the recent discussions from public sector organizations in the UK.
Fantastic. Well, let's jump in. So the previous podcast we recorded, we were talking about some of the challenges around limited budgets in public sector, some of the gotchas and inefficiencies to look out for. Today is all about how to spend wisely, how to invest your limited tech budget into the most strategic initiatives. Of course, this is true for every organization, but when we're thinking about the public purse, and especially at state and local level, you may not even be able to borrow. You might be limited to exactly the number that you've been given. So how do we need to think about this as public sector? Richard, go ahead with your initial thoughts.
You know, Mallory, one thing we've done is to, in the survey work, the research work that we do at the IBV, to think a little differently about the structure of spending in IT organizations. So over the last couple of years, we've collected a lot of data that breaks it down three ways. And first, we look at what we call keep the lights on, business as usual. It's all the bills that come in the door that the IT organization must pay. It's software licenses. It's people, primarily. It is the maintenance on software. It's maintaining legacy organizations. It's all that. It's everything that needs to happen just to open the shop and keep it running. But we do something a little bit differently with the other two. We then say, now, how much of the IT budget is going to initiatives that improve the performance of the IT organization itself? So if we look at the IT organization and say, we're here to deliver services to customers, internal and external, we're here to get the most productivity out of our people, then what are we doing to invest in becoming a better performing IT organization? The third bucket then is how much is left over to support initiatives, programs, investments that the parent organization is making to improve its performance. So in the private sector, we think in terms of what percentage of the IT budget is going to support initiatives that improve measurable business performance. In the public sector, we look at that, the metric is a little bit different, but the way it looks quite clearly then is which programs are we asking each agency to support? What kind of services are we asking them to deliver? And the metric we were trying to get to is what is IT's contribution to that business outcome? In the public sector, it would be what is IT's contribution to the citizen outcome, the program outcome that we're trying to achieve. Now, of course, the problem with that is that these IT organizations are typically, the budgets themselves are typically fixed. What we've found is that in the private sector and public sector, budgets are inching up. It's kind of like the cost of inflation, but not much more than that. Even when we're in a period where there's tons and tons of new investment that will be associated with AI, with automation, with everything it brings to the table. So the problem that, of course, that leaves us with is if 8 out of 10, if you look at your paycheck and say, I'm just going to take 80% of that and park it, right? And I'm going to have to survive on the 20 cents on the dollar, that becomes difficult. So look, over time, what we're advocating and what we see organizations doing is looking at that cost structure, which is pretty consistent, big organizations, small, this industry, that industry, and say, we've got to compress that 80%. We have to find a way. We've got to take the 10%, the 15% that's going to improve the IT organization's performance and aim that directly at the 80% and say, what can I do to reduce those business as usual costs? And then remember that we're getting this money primarily to make the organization at large, the mothership, run better, faster, cheaper. So we can't lose that connection. So it's, it's a challenging environment. But step one is just to have a very clear, well understood, shared understanding of where the money is going now. And if we start there, and that's a lot of, certainly with a product like Aptio, that's part of what we're after. It starts with transparency. We understand how the money is coming in, where is it going, and especially when we look at that top 10% of the budget that's going to mission critical sorts of programs, how do we make sure that we can take a look at the rest of the budget and say, yeah, that we're spending that money, but look, it's in direct support of the thing that really counts.
Greg, I'd love to hear your reactions to that, especially in that context of we're looking at this 80% of keep the lights on, trying to figure out how we can shrink it down. And some of that spend has to be addressable, right? There must be some things we can wiggle around, even if a lot of it is fixed. I'm sure you've seen many examples like that I'm keen to hear about.
There definitely are a lot of things we can work on, right? There are efficiencies to be gained, services that can be sized proportionally to the kind of demand that they see these days. And organizations they've got a responsibility to keep providing those services that they've been providing day in, day out. So they can't just slash those down and not deliver those services. So their real function must be about how do we deliver, some of that on less of the budget by selecting vendors better, selecting resources that they're going to use better, and make reductions in the sizing of those things. But then a lot of the things they have to deliver are politically motivated, right? So these new innovation projects are all about how is the department going to run in the future for a government department? How are they going to deliver better services to citizens or better results in the way that they're dealing with things? And using AI, using new innovation in order to deliver those results. So in order to do that, so some of the funding for those things must be replacing costs elsewhere outside of that IT budget. And that's probably one reason why we see AI spending growing faster than other digital technology investments. That's an IDDC survey from last year, which talked about the rate being about double the rate for AI spending increase.
Which anecdotally aligns with what I've been hearing too. It was almost a protected budget item of, everything else is fixed, but we've got this little pot to experiment with AI. We're going to call that just a teaser for our next episode, and we'll come back to that one. What I want to go back to is, Richard, when we were preparing before this podcast, we had talked about a particular department or agency in the US that was a bit out of date, but was still being supported. And I think this is a great example of we need that visibility into where the money's going to determine, do we still need these things? So I'm baiting you right now, but I'm hoping you can give us that example just to help people see, where do you invest your money?
Yeah, Mallory, that's a great question. And this is a true story. What we found recently is that within the past couple of years, we have finally in the US actually ceased to deliver a service from the government, which its purpose was to compensate widows of our Civil War, which was in the 1860s. It wasn't last quarter, right?
1865, yes.
It wasn't something that happened during the pandemic that we had to shut off. No, and that's an extreme example, and of course it makes amusing headlines. And also, it's not that unusual. The other metaphor I saw in a good case study the other day was what faces the public sector is a lot like this. So you imagine you look out in your driveway and you've got a couple of cars, right? So good. Now, 7 years later, those cars need replacement. The maintenance costs on them have gone way up. They're not stylish anymore. Maybe you really want an electric vehicle these days. So in most of the wide world, you'd say, I'm just going to trade those cars in. I'm going to sell them. I'm going to replace them. What's happening in the public sector effectively is that, no, you have to keep those cars, right? So you now have 4 cars in the driveway, and 7 years later, you'll have 6 cars in the driveway. And if you multiply that across your neighborhood, across the county, across the state, across the nation, all of a sudden you have real money right, being tied up in maintaining things that you're no longer using. And one of the things that the public sector does struggle with, it's a constraint, is the ability to turn things off. Because those things, even the Civil War thing lasted as long as it did because there were some stakeholders who said, no, you can't turn that off. So I've still got 17 widows in West Virginia that are being supported. And so we need the entire program. And you multiply that across the many, many programs. And one thing that is not unique to the public sector, but is certainly more prevalent there, is that new programs are typically net new. The way that they're funded is we're now doing a completely new initiative. And so the budget for that includes that whole initiative. It includes a lot of net new costs, when what should have happened is we should have said, no, we're going to do something new here, but what is the incremental investment that we need to make on top of what we already have? What current costs can be avoided and attributed to the business case for this new program, because we're getting credit for turning off the old thing and not bearing those costs anymore. Just making that simple change in accounting, which is not a law, it's just a matter of what organizations have gotten used to doing. It's the way that they have gotten accustomed to treating depreciation and finance and so forth. If we could just change that one aspect of the budget back to our 80%, that's just the bill that we pay every month. Just being able to turn off, if something net new is coming in, we say, okay, what does that replace? What can we turn off? Just doing that simple thing. And it doesn't have to take as long as from 1865 to today. Just doing that simple thing frees up a lot of that 80% that can now be used for more mission critical things.
Yeah. The 7 cars in the driveway reminds me of my childhood growing up in Michigan, but we're going to set that to the side. Not sure how many of them were running at the time, but it was a lot of upkeep.
I guess
Boy.
one thing to jump in, Mallory, that highlights a common problem in a lot of technology areas, is that people want to innovate with the latest, newest thing. But if it's replacing something that's doing a good job, that's still paying its way, then maybe it's the wrong thing, right? Strategically, you need to be making bets on where will I add the most benefit. And even if your new innovation was slightly better than the existing thing, maybe it's not worth doing it until the life cycle has moved on. And maybe you should be spending your money on another area. And I think that's one thing, if you read through a lot of the public sector announcements on AI, is they're making selections of what to work on based on what they can retire because of it.
Yeah. So let's close out now with some more concrete examples of what we're seeing. I wanted to share one, and then Greg, I'll pass over to you. Something I've seen in a couple of the government organizations we work with in their cloud team. Cloud, it's ubiquitous, but it's still a relatively specialized skill set. And so what those teams are trying to do in terms of architectural design and optimization in cloud, it's pretty specialized. So not every technical person, not every developer and engineer can do it. So you might have a laundry list of things you not only can do, but want to do and even should do. They might all be related to this cost optimization and pushing down that 80%. But the reality is that you only have so many people who can do it, and they only have 2 hands and roughly 40 hours a week. And so if you don't have the budget to bring in a bunch of contractors, you have to recognize the human limitation. And so in this example, there's one of the UK public sector departments. They've got a whole roadmap for their cloud. And If a team is responsible for multiple steps, then it's got to be a waterfall because their time is the real constraint there. So in this example, their current focus is some storage optimization in cloud. And that comes before they make some infrastructure as code changes where things will land kind of pre-optimized. But they viewed the existing storage spend because it's already a line on the budget. They viewed that as a more important and urgent problem to fix before they then kind of move upstream and kind of fix the problem where it starts. And the constraint there is simply that you only have a certain number of people who can do that sort of work. But that's just one example of how they're using their limited budget and people to achieve the outcomes. Greg, any examples you want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. But before I get into another one, I guess in your example, it's a clear, it shows that cost avoidance is harder to justify maybe, or harder to quantify when you're justifying it over something that you can quantify as a cost saving, right? So it's interesting because the cost savings already in the budget, right? That's already money they were going to spend on that storage. They knew they were going to spend it on the next year. By identifying it and working out that there is a target to remove it, they can actually make a saving. Whereas the cost avoidance, you never know, it might be bigger, but it's harder to justify.
Yeah, yeah. Other examples from you, Greg?
Yeah, so I saw a couple of interesting examples just in the last couple of weeks reading up. So one was that HMRC are using AI and predictive analytics to check on tax compliance, right? So watch out if you're filling in your tax incorrectly. But they're actually using AI to look for patterns, look for information in the submissions, and identify red flags and things like that. So that's interesting, and I think that's an example where it's not something that IT would initiate, right? It is that's the function of HMRC, is to look after and ensure that the tax is being correctly collected and issued, right? So it's interesting that's the area that they're choosing to publicize what they're working on. And I saw another interesting one also from the Home Office as well. They're using AI in passport processes, so applications for passports. They're able to use AI to correct and look for the information in the application and speed up the process. And as someone who's recently gotten a UK passport, I must say they've moved that process much quicker than I remember it being before, right? So there's some benefit, not just, I guess, to citizens. It's not just in the cost, but it's in the timeline as well, right? If you can get your request processed a lot quicker, it's got other benefits to the economy, to the world, to your state of being, knowing where your documents are and when are you going to be able to travel next. It makes life a lot easier.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Greg, I think that's a great example. A lot of times with looking at the cost structure, looking at how to reduce costs and so forth, the challenge is, what is the metric we're going to use to measure an improvement in our services for which we have invested this money? And, because we're citizens and we consume these services, sometimes it becomes very obvious. I mean, how many people have you talked to who travel who will say, gosh, it took me 6 months to get my passport updated. I changed my name because I got divorced and it took 17 months. That type of thing are benchmarkable, they're measurable. We don't have to assign a profit motive behind them, but we can say, look, the investments we're making in cloud to support the things we do at the border translate to people getting their passports updated in half the time. Okay, right? So I think there's so many times we say, well, there's not a profit motive in the public sector, and so we can't use some of the techniques that a bank would use or a retailer would use. Not necessarily true. And just when we think about our own interaction with governments as citizens, that becomes very clear that wow, if I understand that the tax dollars I'm paying that translate to the IT organization are making it easier for me to get through the day, then hey, I get it.
And Richard, you also talked about sort of different government organizations sort of copying or kind of passing notes of, hey, this is how we're doing it. Maybe you can try it too. Tell us some examples of that.
Yeah, sure. So, and you find these examples pretty easily just searching on the internet. But one that I like a lot because they're often portrayed, I think, justifiably as a leader in public sector IT, is the government of Singapore, specifically their Department of Defense, where they do a very good job of looking around, again, within the constraints of national security and what governments can share with each other. But they do a very good job of benchmarking how other governments do things that they're either trying to do themselves, or they benchmark them in the sense of this is the state of the art in Australia, but we could take it to another level based on the capabilities that we have today. And so much of that, and it's not just the public sector, but so much is really gets down to relationships and networking and who do we know. That the idea of the community of IT leaders in public sector organizations that are out there finding ways to collaborate, finding ways to use social media, find a way to have one of their technology partners introduce them to their opposite number at another agency. That can be tremendously valuable. I mean, the time that you save by learning what did or didn't work for somebody in a very similar situation is significant and a good way for people to spend time.
Absolutely. And I think that is the perfect place to wrap it up. It's so useful to look around you and say, how are other organizations doing this? How are other countries doing it? What can we learn? And learn from their mistakes, but also learn how to best serve our citizens. So, Richard and Greg, thank you so much for joining us today for this podcast. And to everyone else, thank you for listening. And tune in again next time where we focus on AI initiatives in the public sector. Thank you so much.